Wonderful. Hi, everybody. It's Vivek Patel here from Meaningful Ideas. And I'm going to be sharing some stuff about guiding our kids today. We're going to be doing 4 workshops over the next year, and I'm very excited about them. I started teaching parenting about 15 years ago because I wanted to help parents have better relationships with their kids. When I was young, I was raised in a very aggressive and violent manner. My dad was always hitting me. I was getting hit all the time, beat all the time, punished, locked away, having my stuff taken away. And very quickly I recognized my dad was my adversary, my obstacle, not my partner, not my support. And I knew that if I wanted to survive my with myself intact, I had to pull away from him and put a distance between him. But still getting beaten all the time, it really affected my self-image. And then when I ended up in junior high school, I ended up getting bullied severely. Every single day getting punched and coming home with bruises and bloody noses. And one of their favorite games was they would all surround me when the teacher would leave, and they had those big geography or math textbooks, and they would all beat me with these textbooks. And they'd have a lookout, so when the teacher would come back, they would all run to their seats. So this is the kind of this is how I grew up, right? I grew up. I say I was bullied at home and bullied at school, and I used to get to school like at 6 a.m. So I would avoid all the other kids, 6 or 7 a.m. So I would avoid all the other kids on the way in. So I developed a real fear and victim mentality inside of myself. And then when I was like around 14, 15 years old, I remember this time when I suddenly realized that I was big enough that my dad couldn't hit me anymore. And I can still remember this moment where he was walking towards me. He used to, once I got a little older, his favorite thing was to slap me in the face. And it didn't matter where we were, even in public, it didn't matter. And I remember this one time he was walking towards me and he was getting ready to hit me. And something in me knew I had to fight back, and I was ready to fight. I was going to fight no matter what. He just came towards me, and I remember looking him in the eye, puffing out my chest a little bit and going, "Try it, try it." I didn't even say it loud, just quietly. But there was something in me that I was not going to let him hit me anymore. And he had never experienced that from me. He backed away. And which is, if you're spending your time trying to control your kid by hitting them, you probably are lacking a lot of tools you need to actually have a relationship and emotional regulation. So this man backed away. And so suddenly I had this freedom that I didn't have before because I knew he couldn't control me anymore. Because the only control he had over me was this violence, right? And so he couldn't control me anymore, which also meant he had no influence in my life anymore. But the problem is, I had all this freedom all of a sudden, but I didn't have any skills. I didn't have the self-awareness. I hadn't learned about how my body and my mind and my emotions operate. And I didn't learn that stuff growing up. I only learned to survive. And so I ended up with all of that repressed anger and pain inside of me. I ended up really exploding and acting out for many years, from the age about 14, 15 to my mid 20s. My life was full of violence and crime and aggression and running around with really dangerous people. And my parents never knew any of this was happening. I was really involved in stealing. I even had this whole uh, credit card fraud operation when I was in my late teens. And I was doing all this stuff, getting into fights all the time, constantly in bad relationships, treating people terribly, treating my mom terribly, unfortunately, though we kind of made up for it when we grew up. So I had all this stuff happening and getting into fights all the time. And then when I started taking martial arts and I actually knew how to fight, then the fights were really bad. So when my kid came along, I realized I did not want her to go through the same crap that I went through. And I wanted to do things differently. I didn't want her raised by someone that she had to fear. I wanted her raised by someone that was going to empower her. I didn't want her to raised by someone who was going to control her, but help her learn how to control herself, right? And this, for me, this was so much deeper. And I always wanted to go deeper, right? And this is what I want to do. And I think the more conscious we get, and the more we really think about parenting in a deep way, the more we realize we want to empower our kids. We don't want to disempower them. We don't want to create limitations in their lives. What good is that, right? We want to empower them as much as we can and send them into the world with the greatest foundation that we can. And so we have to think really deeply about what we need to do to give our kids that deepest foundation. I did not want to repeat the same cycles of my dad and my generations before. I mean, things that were good, sure, but the majority of it, no. And so I decided I'm going to do things radically different and have to figure that out. How do I figure that out? What is that all about? And we start to think, my wife and I, we start to think through how are we going to do things differently? How are we going to empower our kids? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And one of the things that um, one of the things about how I raised my kid is I'm a martial artist. I started taking martial arts in 1988, so it's almost 40 years now. And and so I mean I've got swords. Where are my swords? I've got swords back there. And I take them out and I work with them every day. And so my daughter grew up in the martial arts, and we were playing martial art games from the time she was really young. We would we would play with sticks and swords and knives and chains, and I taught her to throw knives when she was like 3 years old, and we would get watermelons and throw knives into watermelons. And my saying is, I taught my kid to throw knives when she was at watermelons when she no, I forgot. I taught my kid to throw knives when she was 3 years old. Watermelons were our targets. None survived. And so we destroyed a whole bunch of watermelons. And I would throw when she was really young, I would throw stuffed animals at her. And then as she got better at it, I would throw, and she had to dodge them or block them. And as she grew up, she got better at it. I would throw rubber balls at her, and eventually I was throwing CDs at her. She was dodging these CDs. And when I say throw it at her, like it was something that we both enjoyed, right? It's not like I was punishing her and throwing. Wait, you didn't put your dishes away. I'm going to throw CDs at you. No, it wasn't that. But we loved it, and she has so much like she's 20, almost 29 now, and we grew. I say she grew up ninja. So we grew up with all these martial art games, all these combat games, but then actually learning the martial arts, she learned to punch and kick and block from the time she was really young. And so she's tough. She's tough as nails, this person. And at the same time, we played with dolls and she painted my nails and we had tea parties, right? And so it was a real balance. And this balance, I think, is something really beautiful that we can achieve when we allow ourselves to be, whole inside and allow ourselves to have like a full range of our feelings and emotions. And which is interestingly enough why the second workshop, which we're going to do in 3 months, is called Working with Our Emotions. But that's also why I wore my yin yang shirt today because so much of the work that we do to guide our kids has these opposites that we're working with, seemingly opposites that we work with. That's why one of our favorite movies is The Karate Kid, especially the original one, right? And in it, Mr. Miyagi says, "Balance, Daniel-san. Life is always about balance, balancing the hard and soft." And yeah, and when my kid was really young, I had a friend say to me, "Vivek, live your life in such a way that your kid is going to admire you, will admire you." And I thought, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. What does that mean? It doesn't always mean that we have to be superstars. It means that we have integrity and we know ourselves and we live a deep life and we try and make the world a better place. And I took that really seriously. I'm like, well, what do I have to do? What I used to think, who do I admire? And from that, I can take in the qualities that I admire and try and absorb them. And so and so I consider the guiding relationship that we have with young people as one of our primary things. We have lived our lives 20, I was 28 when my kid came along. I had 28 years of mistakes that I had learned from. I didn't want my kid to have to make those same mistakes. I wanted her to learn from me, to learn from those mistakes. Like, what's the point? Otherwise, we're just repeating the same cycles over and over again. But I wanted to evolve why did I go through all that pain? Why did I go through all that learning if not to pass it on to my kids? But then I thought, well, if I'm going to pass this on to my kids, I have to think, how do I work it in such a way that the kid actually wants this information and is willing to take it? Because we know that with teenagers, especially, we know as soon as parents start lecturing, they roll their eyes, right? And I was like, how are we going to get past that eye roll? So for me, thinking really deeply about what is guidance and why are we guiding our kids? And then how do we do it in such a way where they feel good about it and don't feel it's a drag? So we're going to talk about all that today. And we're also going to we're going to talk first about the philosophy a little bit, and then we're going to talk about some real practical things that you can do to be a solid lifelong guide to your kids. And I think it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful opportunity for us because, kids, when they come in, the consciousness is brand new and they have to learn so much. Kids are learning machines. And so we have a great opportunity to share information with them. So when my kid was born, I was thinking like, what can I give this young person that's going to help prepare her for her life, prepare her for the real world. Because so much of what we hear out in the parenting sphere is you have to prepare kids for the real world. And when people say that, they usually mean you have to give them punishments and consequences because there's consequences in the real world and they have to learn how to deal with it. But for me, I was thinking, well, my kid is going to experience all sorts of challenges in their life. They're going to have all sorts of relationships in their life, and they're going to deal with the world and so many areas. They have to deal with the corporate world and the legal world and the financial world and all this stuff. And younger, the educational system. What is the real skills and knowledge and attitudes that I can impart to this person that's going to give them the most empowerment? Because I was always thinking about that. How can I empower? How can I empower? How can I empower? That question was burned into my mind. How can I empower? And so I thought of three different areas specifically that I could pass on information to my kid. The first is imparting skills. And then there's attitudes, and then there's knowledge and understanding of how the world works, right? And so the skills, there's different kinds of skills. There's thinking skills. And for me, thinking skills is one of the most important things to pass on to my kid, right? I one of my sayings is I didn't want to teach my kid what to think. I wanted to teach her how to think. And this is so profound. But of course, if I'm going to teach someone how to think, I have to understand the principles, right? So then I started learning how to think critically, how to operate my mind. While studying logic, studying philosophy, studying critical thinking, studying logical fallacies, all the different things that give me independent thinking. Because it's so easy for us. I mean, I used to study hypnosis back in the 90s, and you can plant a suggestion in someone's mind really easily. We're very suggestible creatures. I used to hypnotize people to believe, like like a penny was stuck to the floor, and I would just put a penny down. And I would say the penny is stuck to the floor, and you can't lift it up. And they would struggle and struggle, and I would lift it up and show them it wasn't stuck to the floor, and they would try again, and they couldn't do it. It's amazing what you can make people believe under hypnosis, and so recognizing that, I'm like, okay, well, how do we defend against that? Because suggestions are all around the world, right? So thinking is how do you think and how do you pass on that information to kids is really important. And each of us has to kind of do our own study on that and have our own awareness of that so we can pass it on. It's totally different than telling your kids what to think, right? Teaching them that skill is so powerful. Another thing is about emotions. How do we guide our kids around their feeling world? So much of humanity and the human mechanism is about emotions. I wanted to be able to give my kid the most empowered and profound foundation of their relationship with their emotions, because that way they can feel their emotions, but not be controlled by them. You know, we talk about emotional control. A lot of the time people think emotional control means not feeling your emotions. I rather think it means I can feel all my emotions and I can do it consciously and they don't control me, right? But if you can't feel it, and a lot of us raised as male, we were told our feelings were not acceptable. You know, I was beaten for crying. I couldn't cry. For years, I couldn't cry. It took me decades of work to be able to cry again. That's why I used to say I searched for my tears for years. I was shut down. The only thing I could really feel was anger and a little bit of happiness. And oh, was I angry? I mean, I still am. But oh, in my teens and 20s, I was so angry. I was so angry that if somebody cut me off, like driving, I would drive into oncoming traffic, not to lose them, so that I could deal with them. Like I've gone through a lot to get to find some emotional regulation. But then I realized that again, I don't want my kid to be completely controlled by her emotions and her anger like I was. So then I started to learn about how emotions work and how does emotional regulation work, and I wanted to pass that power on to my kid and practice with it as well. And then the third kind of skill. So the first skill is thinking skills. The second skill is feeling skills. And the third skill is doing skills. How do you do things? How do you get along in the world? How do you understand how the world works? But like actual practical things like putting oil in a car or windshield wiper fluid in a car and filling a tire and doing dishes and laundry and cooking and building things and then also the doing of martial arts was a big one, but sports in general was a big thing for us. So there's all sorts of doing that we can give our kids. So we can impart thinking skills, feeling skills, and doing skills. Really powerful. What opportunities we have. The next section is attitudes. We're teaching attitudes as well. You know, like one of the biggest things is respect. We often talk about wanting kids to learn respect. But usually when people say that, they mean the surface level behavior of respect. But real respect is a relationship. Real respect is how you feel about the other person. Real respect is how you feel about their character and how they treat you and your relationship, right? That's where respect comes from. And then the behavior comes from that. That's why my one-liner, I have a lot of one-liners. My one-liner is inspire the desire and the behavior will follow. When I'm with kids and I'm working with them and I give them a lot of validation and respect, they respect me back so quick. They just want to follow me. They want to trust my guidance. You know, my kid is 29 and regularly reaches out to her parents for advice because our guidance has always felt good to her and felt good to her nervous system. As soon as our teaching feels like a drag, kids don't want to be around, right? They don't want to hear it. Who wants to learn from someone where learning is a drag? Nobody. Who wants to learn from someone that doesn't really see you or or validate you? No one, no one. Like I've studied martial arts for years. I've also studied dance for years, and I can definitely tell the difference between a teacher who really sees me and wants the best for me and a teacher who's operating from their own trauma and just like dumping their stuff on me, you know. And yeah. And so respect is one thing. I want to teach my kid the value of respect, but I want to teach it from the inside out, which means I have to demonstrate it and they have to feel it from me. Does my kid feel respect? Do our kids feel respect from us? This is such a profound thing. This is something I ask about in every one of my interactions with my kid. Are they feeling my respect? And like I mentioned before, empowerment is another attitude. Like the way I was raised, I have like such insecurities and failure consciousness embedded into my nervous system, you know, from constantly being told I wasn't good enough. And yes, I'm 57. I don't feel it as much anymore. I've worked through a lot of it. But again, I didn't want my kid having that heavy, I call it a dark cloud of self-condemnation that follows me everywhere I go. And I was not going to be, I mean, life is going to treat our kids harshly no matter what, because life is challenging. We don't have to be one of the obstacles. That's the key, right? We can be the empowering force. And so one of the attitudes I wanted to pass on was empowerment, self-empowerment, so that my kid knew that she had capacity. And then self-knowledge is another one. That's such an important thing, is having self-knowledge. And really knowledge of all sorts is such an important thing to pass on too, right? Like how the world works. I want my kid to learn how the world works, how systems work. Things like financial literacy and how the law works and how systems of consequences work and all that's the legal system. So we always study that kind of stuff. We want to teach our kids about relationships. Like so much of our human experiences is relationships. You know, I remember when my kid was young, she was in like a middle school, and she was telling me, oh, two of my friends were in a relationship and they broke up, and now all of us are planning to be mean to the boyfriend because they broke up. And I said, you know, absolutely, you need to do whatever you feel is right with you and your group of friends. But let me tell you a story from when I was in high school. So when I was in high school, I had this friend I was really close to, and she had a bad breakup with her boyfriend, and we did the exact same thing. It must be a thing with kids because this is like, 50 years earlier, 40 years earlier. And I said, and so we all decided to like shun this guy. So every time he would walk by in the hallway, I would like give him a look, or I would turn my back on him or something like that. And we all shunned this guy. And then 2 weeks later, they were back together. And I felt so terrible. I was like, I had to face this guy all the time now, and I had just treated him terribly because of that. You know, I said there are ways to support your friend without shunning the other person, because it's entirely possible they're going to get back together in a week. And she was like, oh yeah, right, okay. And she still remembers that to this day. She remembers that about how to support people in a way that doesn't, necessarily put her at risk. But there's an area of like, through that story, through a simple story, I taught her about conflict resolution and relationships and how to have discernment about what to do and what not to do in a difficult situation, and how to set boundaries with friends that ask you to do things that you don't want to do. Like there's a lot in a simple story. There's a lot of information that we can give to our kids. And I'm going to talk about storytelling a little later on and how powerful storytelling can be in guiding our kids. And then we also want to help kids learn about leadership, right? And communication and collaboration and teamwork, and and how to be a powerful leader. So often I hear on parenting posts, people say, oh, if you don't give your kids consequences, they won't listen to their boss. Now, first of all, I'm wondering, why aren't you also helping your kid learn to be the boss? Why is it always they're going to be the employee working for an abusive boss who doesn't listen to them anyways? Let's empower kids to know that they deserve to work in a good environment. or even to be the leader themselves. Why not? Why are we not thinking that way? But teaching our kids about leadership is so important because in our lives, in all different circumstances, we might end up being a leader, you know, and how does that work? And again, storytelling is one of my favorite things to do for kids in leading them. I remember this story I told my kid about this time I was at a martial arts conference back in 2012. And there's this martial artist named Luke Holloway, who was a mentor and a good friend of mine. You can look him up. He's a serious tough guy. And so he had this international martial arts conference where he invited two people from 20 different countries, and I was one of the two from Canada, to go to all expense. It was wonderful. It was all expense paid. Go to the UK, and we trained half the time in the dojo and half the time in the forest. And so there was this one time we were in the forest, and there was a whole bunch of us there. And on like the third or fourth day, we had this wilderness expert come in, and he was going to teach us about building shelters and purifying water in a natural way and all this stuff. And at one point we had this competition where we had four teams of 10, and we were all going to build these shelters out of sticks and leaves and stuff. And he had showed us how to do it. And I at that point I hadn't had a chance to really lead anything. Nobody really knew about my leadership skills at that point. So I was like, I got to show people what I can do. So he said, we need four leaders. I quickly put up my hand. And I went up and I had my group of 10. I think the teacher picked the groups for us. And all the other groups immediately scattered off into the woods to start collecting sticks and start collecting all the different leaves and everything they needed for their thing and scouting out their location. And they were working furiously. And I said, "Okay, hold on, guys, come over here. Let's talk for a bit." And I got us in a huddle. And the first thing I did, I said, "Listen, we're going to destroy these people, but first we need a team name. We need a team name that sounds scary, so we can intimidate everybody." And so everybody was like brainstorming names and having fun doing that. Then we came up with a cheer, and then we had all this stuff happen, and we had all this group bonding stuff while everybody else is working furiously to build their shelter. But me, I've been around long enough that I know that if we connect with the humans first and connect the humans together first, then they are going to want to work so much harder and so much more efficient because so much of the ego is going to come out of it. So I took the time to do this. And then I said, okay, who here knows about building shelters? Because I don't. They all laughed. They said, why'd you volunteer? I said, well, this is why. And so then one guy said, well, actually, I do know. I said, okay, what do we need to do? He said, these kind of sticks, this many of these kind of sticks. Those are over there. Those are over there. I said, okay, everybody go. And we gave jobs and everybody went off. They did their thing. They came back. We were building the shelter. We got it done. We got it done a half hour before everybody else, even though we started later than everybody else. And the teacher came over to me and he's just shaking his head, like, how did you do this? And I told him a little bit, he goes, that's leadership, man. That's leadership. And I just loved it. And then everybody else they were all so upset at us because we've done so much earlier. But the thing is, I came home and I told my kid that story and acting it out and everything, right? And to her, this inspired her to have this leadership mindset and so many lessons inside of that, you know. It empowered her in a way that was like so better than if I had ever told her those things. But by telling the story and elaborating and embellishing on it, it gave her so much. It gave her so much. So that's a beautiful thing, I think, is being able to share skills and attitudes and knowledge with our kids. Really powerful. We're empowering them so much that way. And honestly, if you just take that idea from this workshop and think about how you work with your kids, what skills am I imparting? What attitudes am I inspiring? And what knowledge am I sharing with them? And am I doing it in a way that they can receive it? That alone will transform your parenting in such a dramatic way. And when I started shifting from lecturing to guiding, you know, the reason I wanted to mention discipline, I called it discipline guiding, is because discipline is kind of the old mindset where we force kids and we control kids. But that's not really empowering, right? The other thing that makes guidance feel really empowering is when it feels mutual to the young people. And this is something really beautiful is when it feels mutual. And my kid, from the time she was really young, I would always ask her advice on things, and I would always let her know what I learned from her. And this is something that if you let your kids know, this is another really valuable tip, that if you let your kids know, when we let our kids know that we are learning from them, that is something so powerful because then they know they have wisdom. And then they're more open to learning from our wisdom because it's a mutual thing. And you know, every kid is different. Everything that I share, every kid is different. Every family is different. So I'm sharing principles that you can apply in your own way. Your mind is different and your nervous system is different. Your kid's personality is different. We have to find the way that works for us. But in general, the principles apply. You just have to apply them differently depending on your kid. And when we guide in a way that feels good to our kid, I say don't make learning a drag. That's one of my sayings. Don't make learning a drag. If you don't make learning a drag and you work with your kids in a way that's inspiring and empowering, you end up with a lifelong relationship this way. That's why I mentioned that my kid is 29, almost 29, and still like deeply values my wisdom, but also knows how deeply I value hers. And that's a beautiful thing. Now, let's talk a little bit about what to avoid and what isn't guidance and what gets in the way of guidance, what obstructs it. One of the things is force, when we use force, fear, and pain. When we use force, fear, and pain, fear of punishment, the pain of punishment, or forcing kids to do using our power, whenever we use those things, which are just normal in average parenting, right? In the mass consciousness of parenting, we punish kids and we give them consequences and we tell them what to do. But you can think that, like I think that that's not really deep thinking through how we can guide our kids in the best way. So force, fear, and pain, they make kids turn away from us. They make them put a shield up in front of us, where they can't open themselves. Because learning is a vulnerable thing. Why is learning vulnerable? Because when you learn something, it means what you knew before was less right. It was wrong. And now you're trying to improve and gain more knowledge. It's vulnerable to admit you're wrong. I ask kids all the time, do you know what mistakes are for? And they often say, oh, mistakes are to learn from. And then I'm like, do you know how to learn from mistakes? And they're like, no, I don't actually. Because we tell kids that, but it's mostly lip service if we're not actually teaching them that, right? Not only teaching them that they can learn from mistakes, but it's a wonderful thing to learn from mistakes. If we make mistakes full of shame and pain, shame and blame, and use punishment, then we're not really teaching them to learn from their mistakes and to grow and evolve and to have a learning mindset. And then they're going to stagnate, and we don't want that for our kids, right? And like for example, one of the things that's important to teach our kids is a notion of accountability. But accountability doesn't come from shame and blame. It comes from caring about our impact on other people, caring about other people, and caring about our impact on other people, and wanting to acknowledge and repair. Now that is accountability, right? But that's not an attitude you can force on someone. You can force an apology, but that's surface level. And in fact, when we do surface level stuff, kids learn the opposite lesson. Apology doesn't feel like an empowering thing for them. How can you make accountability empowering? It's because it makes you more aligned with yourself, you more in integrity with yourself, with your own values. This is why I also didn't want to impose my values on my kid. I wanted them to discover their own values, right? Because then the values are self-sustaining. Then when no one's looking, you still honor your values. Even when there's a negative consequence for being true to yourself, you still do it because you know your own values. And that's power. That's inner power. And like in my relationship with my kid, I didn't want to be like with the reason I avoided all punishments and those kind of things is I didn't want to be the cop, the judge, the jury, and the prison guard in my relationship with my kid. That did not seem very effective. Like I spent a decade before COVID happened. I spent a decade with my mom every single week on Tuesdays. We would go to a prison and do self-empowerment workshops in prisons. And when I was young, going through my difficult times, I thankfully never got caught, never got arrested. But that's only by luck and grace that happened. So every week for a decade, my mom and I would go into this prison and talk to some of the most criminals who I don't want to call them criminals, incarcerated people who've done some of the most worst crimes. And our 6 week program would transform these people into a completely different mindset where they wanted to bring goodness to the world. They wanted to heal themselves and have a positive impact. But we could never force them to do that, right? It had to be through inspiration. We had to inspire them to see themselves and know they had potential and then want to bring that potential into the world. And it's the same kind of thing with our young people. When I was at that martial arts conference in the UK back in 2012, it was 2012. That's a long time ago. But back then, one of the other people was a prison guard. I think he was from the States somewhere. He was a prison guard. and at a maximum security prison in the States. So like the stories he was telling of the things that he saw in there was wild. But I remember this one story he was telling. He used to say that when I go to this prison and I interact with these people, I try and give them as much empathy and connection and kindness as I can because I know. He said all the other people, all my colleagues, they thought I was foolish. But because they were all much harder. But he said, I knew that if I had any chance of influencing them positively so that when they get out, they wouldn't commit the same crimes, the only way I could do that is to give them some compassion and really see who they are, right? And operate from kindness and empathy. He used to call it the Department of Connection instead of the Department of Corrections. So I really admired him. And he told the story about one time there was this riot in the prison, and the inmates had made all these makeshift knives, and they were going around and executing the prison guards, and anyone else they could get their hands on. And this guy was like terrified for his life. And this one prisoner that he had been particularly kind to saw him and grabbed him and pulled him into the bathroom and said, "Don't say a word." And he took out his own shiv that was covered in blood and he held it over him like he was just about to kill him. And a bunch of guys came in to join, and he looked at them and went, "This one's mine." And they all left. And they just stayed in there, and he protected him. And he said, the only thing that saved my life in that moment was the empathy that I gave that man. And so, when I think about that, I'm like, I do not want to be the prison guard for my kid. I have my notes, by the way. I make a bunch of notes when I do things. I didn't want to be the prison guard in my relationship with my kid. No, that's not gonna work. All right, what else gets in the way? Another thing that gets in the way is when we have our old mindset, a punishment or control mindset still. And because like I grew up being punished all the time. So in my head and in my nervous system, that seemed logical. And I had to constantly fight that old way of thinking to be more evolved and to be more connected. So when we do that work on ourselves, it changes everything. But the old mindset is always going to come after us. You have to give kids consequences or they're not going to learn about consequences in the real world. Well, how about I actually just teach them about consequences and what they are and how they operate and what the pros and cons are and how to evaluate them versus your values. Like there's so many ways we can teach kids that are more evolved than just giving them consequences and hoping they figure it out, right? Um, so the other thing is our own nervous system triggers. Now, this is something again that as we're growing up, we were not taught about our own nervous system. Most of us were not taught about our own nervous system. I was obsessive about making sure my kid knew about their mind and their nervous system, their body, and how it worked, right? But me, no. I had to learn all that's not relearn. I had to learn all that stuff. But our nervous system triggers is different than our thinking. Like if the old mindset, I can think through it, but your nervous system, you can't. It's a physical thing. With a like if you have a cut on your arm and somebody pokes it, you're going to jump. You can't intellectualize your way out of not jumping. You're going to jump, right? And it's the same with trauma. It's the same with our nervous system. That when something pokes it right on the pain point, we jump. So maybe that jump is you yell at your kids. Maybe that jump is you get angry all of a sudden and lose patience. Maybe the trigger is that you send them to their room, right? I remember when my kid was like 2 or 3, and she did something that just pissed me off, and I went, "Go to your room." And I pointed authoritatively, and my wife put her hand on my shoulder, and she was like, "Vivek, we don't do that." I was like, "Oh, right." But that's the thing, right? Our nervous system gets to us. And so and our emotions too. Our emotions can get to us. When we do our next live in 3 months, we're going to focus on emotions and how we work with our emotions and how to work with our nervous system. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that now because we're going to spend the whole hour on that coming up. But that's really powerful. So those things, knowing those things are the obstacles, we can work with them consciously, right? And I think that's powerful. And just so you know, I appreciate that some people are taking notes. I think that's worthwhile. And I'm also gonna, because you're not gonna be doing this for everything, but I'm gonna send out a sheet with a summary of all the points that I talked about, and I'm gonna send it to the trauma informed parenting folks, and then they can send it out to you all. But still, it's worth taking notes because things that stick with you, like you'll be able to review them. All right. So now, one of the beautiful benefits of guiding in a way that feels good to our kids' nervous system, feels good to them in the relationship, is that it deepens the trust they have in us. It deepens the trust they have in us. It deepens the safety they feel with us. And therefore, instead of turning away from us like I did with my parents, they'll turn towards us. They'll turn towards us when times are hard for them. They'll turn towards us when they make mistakes because they know that we're going to guide them and not make them feel bad for it. And when they need advice, they're going to come to us because they trust our wisdom and they trust our guidance. And they know in their hearts that our guidance is there to make their lives better. Not because we're trying to tell them what to do, but we really genuinely are trying to make their lives better. Telling them that is one thing, but helping them feel that sense of deep safety and trust is so powerful. And this is, I think, one of the most beautiful things about shifting how we guide our kids. And what apologizing, I think, is a big part of that as well, right? We mentioned taking accountability before. And when we do that and model that for our kids, I think that's really powerful too. All right. So we're coming close-ish to the end. That is basically the philosophy I wanted to share. I wanted to share about first of all, my past and my very difficult youth and why that inspired me to want to parent in a different way. So that I always used to think, well, Mike, if I do this, will my kid want to hang out with me when they're 18? Because I want a lifelong relationship with my kid, and I have it. She's 29 and we're best friends and we find every excuse we can to hang out, and it's just the best thing in the world. Same with her mom. And we have like they have mom and daughter dates, and I have dad and daughter dates, and then we have full family dates, and then it's just wonderful that that is such a present thing for us. And I tell you, I dreamed of that when she was young. I dreamed of it when she was young. And it's not just hanging out, but it's like we have deep conversations about life and think about things together. We learn about things together. It's really a beautiful thing. It's one of the reasons I'm so dedicated to this kind of parenting is because I know the kind of lifelong relationship that it creates between parent and child. So we also talked about guidance being part of preparing kids for the real world and imparting skills to them and attitudes and knowledge, and that those things are so empowering for them, and that also we want them to feel that it's mutual. And we talked about that guidance isn't force and pain and shame and blame, and that even though we were brought up that way, we want to try and shift those patterns so we're not dumping all that stuff onto our kids. But I'm going to use the word empowering a lot. I probably should have put it in the title, that we want to empower their relationship with themselves, which is like the primary foundation. Like when my kid was born in 97, I could not possibly imagine what the world was going to look like when she was 20. I did not know the internet was coming. I did not know AI was coming. I did not know the world was gonna like burn to the ground or appear to burn to the ground. I didn't know any of this stuff was going to happen. So I knew I couldn't prepare her like based on what the world was like. What's the inner foundation that will carry our kids through whatever the world is going to look like? Like if you have a 5-year-old, what's the world going to look like when they're 20 and 25? We have no idea. I was listening to an interview with the CEO of OpenAI, which makes Chat GPT, and he was saying he can't even think 5 years into the future about AI. It's moving so rapidly. He can, at the most, he stretches his brain into 2 years. And I was like, if this person's on the cutting edge, can't even think 5 years, how can we even imagine what 10 and 15 and 20 years is going to look like? So then, instead of trying to force kids into how the world is today, what are the foundational things we can give them that will carry them through no matter what the world looks like? And that's why I mentioned knowing how your nervous system operates, knowing how thinking operates, knowing how your emotions operate, knowing how relationships operate, and the communication and conflict resolution and leadership and all these things that will be the same, in many ways, years to come. Unless we get microchips that fix all of it. I don't know, but that's possible too. But if not, if the microchip doesn't fix all of that, then those are the powerful skills and knowledge and attitudes that we want to impart to our kids. So let's talk about some of the things that we can do now, a little bit more practical and actionable that you can actually do to enhance your guiding relationship with your kid. Because we talked about what obstructs it, now we're going to talk about what enhances it. And so there's another example of the yin yang, right? Is looking at the obstructions and looking at the enhancements, and that's what makes it what gets in the way and what empowers us with it. So one of the first ones is patience, which connects directly to the nervous system activation I was talking about before. Learning to develop patience where we can take a breath and respond in a way that doesn't activate our kids' nervous systems even more is such a powerful tool. It's not easy. Takes a lot of self evaluation and work and shifting and growing and evolving, and it sucks. It's actually it sucks and it's wonderful at the same time. It sucks because it's hard work and we have to be honest with ourselves. That's why the next workshop is about working with our own emotions, because it's our emotions and our nervous system and our history, so that we can make more conscious choices around our kids. And that's one of the things patience does, is it allows us to be more conscious and make choices in the moment rather than just going on automatic. Patience. Another one is reliability. Are you emotionally reliable to your kid? Are you predictable? Do they know that when they come to you, it's very likely they're not going to get yelled at, that they're going to receive consistent love, loving, kind, and compassion from you? You know, we hear often that parents need to be consistent, and usually in the mainstream, when they say that, they mean if you make a threat, which is not really a healthy way to interact with another human, anyways. But if you make a threat, you have to be consistent and follow through. If you have consequences, you have to be consistent and follow through. And for me, that never made sense. That didn't seem like that was going to create a deep, lifelong guiding relationship where my kids turn towards me and want to follow my advice and want my guidance, right? So instead, I changed it to I do want to be consistent. I want to be consistently kind, consistently loving, consistently patient, and consistently wise. And I say wise meaning the things that I share with my kid, it feels good to them and it improves their life, which means, of course, I need to do a lot of thinking myself so that I'm doing that. So that's one thing is are we emotionally reliable and safe and consistent? And of course the answer is no, we're not. We're not. I'm certainly not. And I mean, I told a story about sending my kid to her room, but I also had this. I remember when she was like one or something, and she was in the washroom, and she pulled all the toilet paper. Like I had gone away for a second and come back, and she had pulled all the toilet paper off the roll. And I don't know, man, it just made me flip out. I started yelling and screaming. I'm running around the apartment. I punched a hole in the closet door. I was so angry. I called it the toilet paper incident. I was so angry. I had never seen, it had been a long time since I had seen that level of anger come out of me. And certainly my kid, it just upset me so much. I mean, it upset her and it also upset me. I was like, Vivek, you cannot continue this way. You have to deal with that. You have to shift that, right? And that became really important to me to heal, not only for myself, although I get the side benefit of actually feeling more integrated inside, but because I didn't want to keep doing that to my kid. All right. Another thing is something I call iceberg consciousness. Iceberg consciousness. I also have called it X-ray vision. Iceberg consciousness allows us to see under the surface of what's happening with our kid. So you know that an iceberg only has a little bit that's showing out of the above the water, but underneath there's a massive amount of information that's there. There's the nervous system, there's trauma, there's deep feelings that are going on. There's there could be like many frustrations that have added up. Sometimes we see our kids explode and it seems disproportionate. But if we understood what was happening underneath, how it's been building, then we would see it. It makes sense. This is something I call the watermelon elastic band analogy. If you go onto YouTube and you type in watermelon elastic band, you'll see these videos of people putting elastic bands on a full-size watermelon. And they put one or two or three, nothing happens. But then they put 200, 300, 400 elastic bands on the watermelon. The elastic bands are this thick. And one last elastic band, and the whole thing explodes. And there's watermelon everywhere, right? And we're very much like that. We have emotional elastic bands and frustration elastic bands that build up all throughout the day. And those things build and build and build and build. And then sometimes just one thing and we explode, right? And our kids are very much like that. And they really build those elastic bands because they don't have the same necessarily have skills to offload those things. So there's something I call elastic band management. There's two parts to that. One is to recognize that what looks like a disproportionate response from our kids is actually probably the watermelon exploding from many things. And this was the last straw. That way, it helps us have more patience, more awareness. Oh, there's stuff underneath. Let me see. Do I need to address the nervous system? Do I need to address the relationship? Do I need to help them offload some of that frustration they've been carrying? Do they need to really feel safe to express their frustration with me right now? What does my kid really need, right? What unmet needs are there? Maybe there's an unmet need that I have to help them with. So there's like all sorts of things that iceberg consciousness helps us with, and it also helps us it also helps us understand ourselves more too, right? Because then we can look under the surface of what's happening with us, and that gives us so much more compassion, and so it gives us compassion and capacity to help our kids. So that's iceberg consciousness connected to the watermelon. Another one I mentioned was stories. Yeah, with stories, my kid remembers my stories. Practicing storytelling is really worthwhile. And my kid loves my stories so much. And I've tried to tell her like every story from my life. And every one of us, if we look at our lives, we can create stories from so many different incidences in our lives. And if you think of an underlying lesson, you can kind of sneak it in there without them knowing. I call it undercover lessons, right? And like I remember my kid again, she came home from school in like middle school or something, and this one she was like, Dad, my friend, he was like he wanted to ask this girl out and he was really trying to get her to go out with him, and he like bought her a present, he did all this stuff, but she just kept didn't want anything to do with him. And I said, the thing is, he was trying so hard that there was so much effort that it didn't feel natural. It didn't allow the relationship to evolve. I said, what this guy needs to do, he needs to just be cool. I just said that. I said, just be cool. If you're just cool, you just relax and be cool and have a relationship with the person. It might turn into something more. It might not, but it might. There's much more chance if you just play it cool. And she told me recently, she's 20, almost 29, right? She told me recently that even like 18, 20 years later, she still says to herself, play it cool, play it cool. She keeps that in her mind, you know? And so our stories, when we tell stories to our kids or share things in a way that has like some fun in it or something interesting in it, like play it cool or be cool, that's got like it's kind of a fun saying. I'm not saying, oh, he shouldn't have done that. He should have done this instead. It wasn't a lecture, right? And so yeah, and so that's telling stories. But another part of what we can share with kids is share our own process, our own learning, our own struggles, and how we deal with it. If someone says something to me that hurts my feelings, I share it with my kid and how I dealt with it. And I'll even and then I'll and the mutual part is I'll ask her, how do you deal with it when something like that happens, or what do you think I could do to help me with this situation? You know, and I'm always going to young people. I keep saying young people because I've worked with a lot of kids over the years. I keep going to young people and I ask them for their ideas and I ask them for their advice because it helps them know. Number one, it helps them know that I respect their wisdom, but then it helps them learn to respect their own wisdom and respect their own selves. And that's, I think, a powerful thing that we can offer our kids. And so sharing my thinking around things, sharing my process around things, without it being like a lecture, but really just sharing. Like I was telling my kid yesterday, I said, I've had a few anxious days. And it's true. I had a few anxious days. I was feeling more anxious than usual. And it was like burning in my stomach, and I just didn't know what it was about. And I thought, I'm not just going to push this away. Here's the undercover lesson. I thought, I'm not just going to push it away. I'm going to take the time to really feel this anxiety and see what's underneath it. And she was like, yeah, it's really important to see what's underneath your feelings, Dad. And I was like, yeah, thank you. You're right. And so that was a way that I can share. That's sharing my process, sharing my living. And it was living. It was real. I didn't make it up, you know. Um, and I received her suggestions so openly, right? Being open to our kids' feedback is another one. Being open to them sharing with you. And not only that, like letting them know that you want to know their feedback. If I'm ever out of alignment, if I'm ever treating my kid in a way that she doesn't feel good about, I want her to tell me. I want her to tell me so that we can, and same with my wife, same with my friends, same with my mom, even though she passed away 6 months ago, wherever she is now, in whatever form she is now. But with all my close relationships, I want these people to know that if I'm doing something that doesn't feel good to them, I want to know about it. And then we can work together to figure out something that's better, right? And that's a beautiful relationship to have with your kid. And role plays is another one. When you have something to teach or you have something to evaluate or work through, doing role plays or games with animals or stuffed toys or action figures or drawing or like anything that can acting things out is so much fun. Like anything that we can do that brings some fun into it. Like I had this one kid I was working with where he was being bullied by these other kids, and then he like punched one of them in the face and swore at the other ones, and of course he was the one that got suspended. So I said, hey, let's play that out with your Spider-Man and your Hulk and your Batman. So we pulled all these all these action figures out, And we started playing the exact thing out. And then I said, let's try different endings. And so then we played with the action figures. We tried different endings and we explored all. Some of them were like wild and completely off the wall, but some of them were like, and now what if you want to just say something to them? But I just stick that in the middle, right? And then we played all sorts of different ways. And all of a sudden, this kid was starting to really think, what are different ways that I can respond to that moment? But if I had tried to lecture this kid about it, there's no way it would have turned into him actually thinking it through for himself, right? And so when we use connection and play and make it not so serious, we get past the shield that the kids put up. I talk about there's three main uh, responses to force and coercion with our kids, and that's resistance, compliance, and distance. Resistance, they resist us and they put up a shield. Compliance, which is different from cooperation. Compliance, their spirit is broken, or they're so desperate not to lose connection with their parent, or they're afraid for some reason and they shut themselves down and they just comply. And distance is the third, distance from themselves and distance from us. And both resistance and compliance create distance, right? And and even in resistance, when kids are rebelling and resisting against the authority figure, they're still not being true to themselves, honoring themselves, doing what they want. They're still responding to the command of the authority. But I wanted my kid to know themselves from the inside out, right? And not to only be trying to figure out how do they manage this authority figure. Because that's what it is. If I become the obstacle, then all of a sudden the kid has to manage the obstacle rather than be the trusted guide walking side by side where the kid turns to you. And that's one of the most beautiful things that we can do with our kids is have that relationship where they can lean on us through our whole lives. And I'm talking about my kid leaning on me, but she's, like I said, she's married, she has a house, she has a job. They've got two dogs and two cats, and they have a whole life, and still we're also deeply connected, which is beautiful. And yeah, so we want to pass on values to our kids. We want to pass on deep thinking to our kids. We want to model. That's another beautiful way that we guide our kids is our model. There's three main areas that we model. How are we treating our kids is one, and they learn about human relationships from that right off the bat. How are we treating ourselves? And then how are we treating others? I regularly tell my kids stories about my interactions with the cashier at the grocery store and how I try to bring some real connection in that moment. Like little moments where I live up to my potential, I share with my kids so that they can get inspired by that. And now she loves to make human connections when she goes into a store. Any store she goes to regularly, they all know her. They all bend over backwards to help her and same at work wherever she goes at work because she really cares about people and she doesn't care, she's not afraid of doing bad or afraid of consequences. She works well because she cares about the other people she's working with. And that's why I say people say if you don't give your kids consequences, they won't be afraid of their boss. And I say, well, what if they care about their boss as a human? Right? Then they will. And it's a totally different way of working with things. And yeah, and media awareness is another thing that's really important to give kids, especially in this day and age. To be able to evaluate media that they consume in a critical way is so important. So there's so many different areas that we can guide our kids, right? And shifting our guidance to a way that they really feel connected to us is so important. Now, we when we start to think this way, we may have to recognize that there's things about us that we need to change. There's things about our thinking that we need to change. There's things about our relationship with our feelings and our nervous system that we need to change. There's things about the way we respond when our kids do things that we would rather they didn't, that we need to change. And yeah, and I think that's really powerful, because that means that we're conscious and we're open to change. And that's another model that we set with our kids. So I was saying modeling how we treat them, modeling how we treat ourselves is a big one because they're watching that. So that's why I want to be kind to myself, and that's why I want to be honest with myself. And yeah, not the obstacle, right? And then the third is how we treat other people in the world, right? And so all of this is really important. And so that's what I want to share with you for today, my friends. I hope that's helpful. I am going to send out a summary. I want to tell you one of my favorite one-liners of mine. It says, guide your kids like the banks of a river guiding the flow, not like a dam stopping the flow. And this is something that I think is just really powerful to keep in mind. If you can keep that image in your mind, are you the dam stopping the flow, or are you the banks of the river guiding the flow? And the banks of the river are not separate from the river. In many ways, they define the river and they guide the river, and the river feels deeply connected to the banks, right? It's one system really. And so if you keep that image in your heart and think of the different aspects of guiding and the things that make it feel good to them and or make them pull away from you, I think you'll be able to really evolve your role as a guide to your kids. It's certainly for me, I'm always trying to evolve. And the more that we do that, the more we deepen our practice and the more of a deep guiding relationship we're going to have with our kids and empower them when they go out into the world. So thank you very much, my friends. I appreciate you being here. We're going to have some questions soon. There still are 3 more workshops coming up. We're going to be talking about working with our own emotions at the next one, which, like I said, is really important because it gives us. I mean, we live in this mechanism. We might as well learn how it operates and operate it to our maximum efficiency, right? And then the next one's going to be called redefining strength. And this is because we've been sold so many lies about what strength is. And then to actually really understand how to be a powerful person for ourselves, it's so important. Be a powerful thinker, be a powerful feeler, be a powerful doer. In so many different aspects of us, we want to learn how we can be, what redefining strength is. And then the last one is cooperation and connection. Because when we can really focus on cooperation versus compliance, we start to create a family system that just flows like the banks of the river, that just flows in a way that's so much more beautiful than when everybody is, fighting each other in obstacles and power struggles. That's not a good way to go through life. So yeah, that's it, everybody. Thank you so much. And I look forward to more of these.